Listen, Crib community, thank you once again for joining us for 3830. And you know what to do, Crib community. When you come on in the room, and hit share. Share with your friends. Let them know that we are back. We are back Wednesday night for 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, to hold the space, to have candid conversations about the impact of structural inequities that are inherently violent and impact some of our most vulnerable communities. Just tell them, come join us for just 30 minutes. 30 minutes. And we do this not just from our head space, but also from our heart space. So I thank you, Crib community, for joining us every week to really tune in on some good discussion. And yet again, I'm telling you, this week will not disappoint. I have a dear friend, a dear mentor, Dr. Lee Cornelius, joining us this evening. And I just want to thank him in advance for joining, because he stayed booked and busy like most of our guests. So I appreciate you making the time, sir. Appreciate you making the time.
An honor. It's just you and I chatting and other people hanging out with us.
They're just watching us chat, basically.
It's just another conversation.
Well, I'm going to read this bio because I think the Crib community needs to know who's on the line.
The better version.
This is the clean version, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, folks, Crib community, Dr. Lee Cornelius is the Donald Lee Hollowell Distinguished Professor of Civil Rights and Social Justice Studies and the director of the Center for Social Justice, Human and Civil Rights at the University of Georgia. He has more than 26 years as a Maryland licensed social worker, providing psychosocial support to individuals and families, 31 years of experience in multicultural community-based participatory research, and more than 40 years of experience in advanced survey design, statistical support, and evaluation research. I'm not done, y'all. I'm not done. Wait for it.
No better.
He has trained. Just sit back and just receive your flowers.
And there's more, right?
Receive your flowers. Receive your flowers. He has trained more than 150 professionals in designing and conducting outcomes research, coached 36 mid-career social workers in leadership development, mentored 42 doctoral students, 42 doctoral students, trained 10 post-MD, PhD, early career minority researchers as part of the Association of American Medical Colleges Minority Health Services Research Program, and taught more than 2,600 MSW and BSW students. Dr. Cornelius' research focuses on developing community responsive, culturally appropriate, educational, attitudinal, and behavioral change interventions, as well as examining the barriers to the adaptation of successful interventions by individuals, practitioners, and communities. Dr. Cornelius, who I finally call Dr. Lee or Lee, has been recognized as the 5th most cited African-American scholar in social work. Dr. Cornelius' book, Designing and Conducting Health Surveys, a Comprehensive Guide, has been cited more than 17,000 times since it was published in 2006. In May of 2014, he published a book entitled A Social Justice Approach for Survey Design and Analysis. In 2019, he received the Carl A. Scott Memorial Lecturer Award by the Council on Social Work Education for his lifetime achievements in social and economic justice. Since 2016, he has produced a podcast series entitled Voices for Social Justice, which has had more than 116 shows covering a variety of social justice issues. And last but certainly not least, he is not only a faculty affiliate of the Crib, but has been an invaluable an invaluable mentor who I can always call upon for both personal and professional advice. And for that, with deep gratitude, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Lee.
you.
Thank you so much.
So you said priceless as opposed to worthless, right? We're gonna have a mad 30 minutes, everybody. Just want to let you know.
Yeah,
Got
just
jokes. Here's
buckle
jokes.
up. Buckle up, y'all,
Right.
because he's a hoot. He's a hoot. He gonna cut up. He gonna cut up. Just put in the chat, y'all. It's 9:15. You need to get off the live. Just
Right, exactly. Explain to your friends you're gonna run a little late. Let me say a tiny bit.
so listen, Lee. Dr. Lee, tell us what drew you to this work. Seriously, what drew
You
you to
know,
this work?
it's funny. I kind of meditated on. Oh, actually, first, I live in Georgia, so first I need to honor the Cherokee and Muskogee nations whose ground that I sit on and have been here for thousands of years.
Mm,
So it's in that space that I want to honor our time together for indigenous people who are throughout the world, so to speak. You
mm-hmm.
know, I actually had a couple thoughts on, lest I forget, the little piece that we started with was called Gentleman by Fela Kuti. And
Yes.
what's neat about that is it's his reflection on being anti-colonialist.
Mm,
I'm not a colonialist. I'm
mm,
an original African. He called
mm,
it African original.
mm,
And that's why it's
mm.
so beautiful because he's like, let all you folk get this straight.
Yes.
I'm an African original, right? So so actually, like I have like 3 points I want to share. Yet actually, I was just sitting with my dad spiritually,
Mm,
and it's kind of funny. When I was a little kid, he called me professor because I wore glasses ever since I was 6 years old.
mm.
Who knew? Because that really wasn't the story.
Wow.
Who knew? That's all I have to say, right?
Wow.
So
Spoke that
then
into
it's like,
existence. Spoke that
but
into existence.
and it's like, be careful, and this is like a message for us to our children and grandchildren.
Mm.
Our language is really more important than you ever realize. Right?
Indeed. Indeed.
So, so there's three kind of like the highlights. One is that I grew up in a community, El Barrio, Spanish Harlem in New York City, where culture, empowerment, and liberation was an everyday thing, as
Mm.
represented in music, in
Mm.
art, in speaker forums, WBLS radio station. I can give props to that. There's a whole story about that New York public broadcasting, the Like It Is show, and how that community was a place for collective social action that I took for granted
Yeah.
as a McYoungin until it all changed in America after 1979.
Mm.
Second point, as a scholar, I always focused on equity since the 1980s, even in the ebbs and flows, and when it was popular, and when people want to stomp on it,
And when it
and
wasn't,
particularly,
and even when
right?
it wasn't.
And it's fun when someone says, "Oh, Ma, you focus on equity." I'm sorry, I've been focusing on it since the 1980s. So, and this is particularly in my work in healthcare, behavioral health, and HIV/AIDS. And then finally, I taught courses in resistance movements, racism,
Mm.
diversity, power, and oppression for decades.
Mm. Wow. I have
Right.
to say, I'm, I'm in this moment. I can't believe I'm actually tearing up a little bit. In this moment, you know, I used to see you every day because we used to work together, and I could talk to you, reach you down the hall, and pluck your nerves and, and ask you some advice. But in this moment, I'm filled with such gratitude, um, as you describe your journey and the fact that you are so consistently generous with, like, not only who you are, but um, the journey of becoming who you are. And I'm feeling very blessed to be privileged to I don't know, just have that mentorship from you. So just thank you. I know I
Thank
said
you.
it before, but I
You
don't know,
know,
it just hit me hard.
we try to practice every day, right? The person we wish to become, and also just kind of think about. I'm sitting here with First Nations. I think about the Iroquois Confederacy and how they've talked about seven generations in the past and seven generations forward,
Mm,
right? So
mm,
we have to embrace timelessness in terms of what we do. The conversation we're having and that you're recording is not for today. It's for 40
mm,
years from now,
mm.
right?
But on
It's
that note,
it's you know
that yes, that part, that part, that part. Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting. One of my students asked me, and how do you do what you do, or why do you do it? It must be difficult. And I was like, I'm only doing what has been done for me. You pass it along. You pass it along. So thank you. So I want to get into just all this wisdom and unpack this, particularly just a lot of spaces and places where you have gone about and how you've gone about uplifting and addressing social injustice through an equity framework. You and I had a conversation. Let's start there. You and I had a conversation recently about social movements in response to anti-Black racism. And we were talking about the fact that the murder of Ahmaud Arbery occurred not too far from where you are currently located. And I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on the important role of social movements, the civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter, etc., in addressing the violent erasure of Black bodies, which is our theme for this season. Um, Simply put, like, how do we move from a moment to a movement designed for sustainable and impactful change?
well, I'm gonna kind of share some thoughts, and I'm gonna make sure I tie back into the whole thing with Maud Aubrey. One of our challenges is that we here in the United States and North America, Canada, and Latin America, and so on. Right now, we tend to be
Yeah.
ahistorical. His, her, and their historical, right? In other words, and part of the issue is we forget that you could not have a Black Lives Movement without Marcus Garvey and the UNIA,
Mm-hmm.
without the don't buy where you can't work campaigns that we had from the 1940s onwards, and without the Black Wall Streets of Tulsa and Rosewood. Make note that those are two examples where there was violence inflicted against the segregated communities at poor, middle class, and wealthy individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and the response, and we'll talk about state violence later, the response to that is to burn stuff down and kill folk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to understand that that's a journey. Now, there's some points about that. First, Garvey taught us about Black love and Black racial pride in the face of the Jim Crow movement long before the 1960s civil rights movement. And it isn't just the Black civil rights movement. It has other movements. I was at an international conference in 2014 in Australia, and not Sydney, Melbourne. Went to a museum, and they had a wonderful exhibit about the Aboriginal population, and they had pictures about the Black Power movement in the 1960s in Australia. I was like, stop, I can't take this. This is too much for me to handle, right? So now, what we learned, though, in the contemporary space of social movements is the importance of use, like right now, using social media to decentralize power based on community organizations allowing local diversity while finding a unifying thread. Because that was where we kind of fell astray in the earlier movements, where they picked off the leaders. And so the conversation we're having in the 21st century is, I don't think so. There are many heads as opposed to just one.
Mm-hmm.
I would say today, though, we need this combination of the decentralized movement and a national collective action around core
Mm,
issues, such as jobs, housing, food desert, discrimination, and so on. In other words, don't throw everything out, pull it all together. So I
mm,
want to pivot, though, back to the piece about Ahmaud Arbery, right?
mm.
Um, I live in the Atlanta metro area, and Brunswick is about a 5.5 hour drive. Down the Georgia coast, it's about 30 minutes from the Florida state line. And that is where Ahmaud Arbery was assassinated.
Mm.
Yet, one of the things to understand is that is in the same area from North Carolina to Florida, along the coast, is the Geechee Gullah Nation. And,
Yes.
and you and representing Africans who were left on the islands off the coast and held their self-standing indigenous space. But actually, where Dr. Sharpe and I got in this conversation was about one of my mavericks, who's in his mid-80s. I just adore, is a guy named Reverend Zach Lai, and basically he's still kicking behind and taking down numbers. There was a situation in 2010 where he was protesting the courts
Mm.
system for inappropriately putting somebody in jail for 12 months when they
Yeah.
didn't do a charge. This year he was advocating for the homeless in
Mm.
Brunswick, and he shared also with me his personal witnessing of chain gangs there in Glenn County
Wow.
as in his childhood. So when you're talking about all this thing in terms of the legacy and these movements, you have timeless stuff, you have linear things, and then you have the people who feed
Mm.
multiple generations.
Mm. Mm. But there's such a theme, the thread of liberation, resistance, the thread of power, the reclaiming of power or recognition of existing power that is really there. Um, yeah, so important. So important. And I wrote down, which is really resonating with me as I'm, for those of you on the, again, I digress, but I think I'm gonna write a book about how to MacGyver IG Live your phone while you're at a hotel. I'm just saying, I think there's something there. But when you said social media, um, to desensitize power, the use of social media, it's not lost on me the conversations about AI, the conversations about spaces and places where youth go for support when they are experiencing tremendous loss and grief. So I think that's something that we all need to pay attention to, but draw that thread of connection in terms of movements and how they've begun to manifest. That was really important. Thank you for that, Jim. Um, so I want to take a dive into your research and the way that you move when you do your work. You have led several community engaged research projects in Black communities throughout the diaspora with the goal of informing sustainable change. What would you say are key challenges and key barriers to translating research findings into impactful policy that informs practice with Black communities?
Well, I'll give you some things for all of us to consider. One is this whole thing about virtual advocacy
Mm,
and the whole idea that, one of the benefits of, when we had the shutdown was that we dived into activism around the globe,
mm,
and we had to think about how do you take face-to-face activism and make it
mm.
virtual. We also have to understand that this policy dance is long term.
Thank
You have to be a
you.
continual sentinel. We have to get out of it's hot for the
Ma'am.
moment
Thank you.
versus continuing to push it. Like I focused on the issue of the uninsured for a long time, and
Mm,
I would just get incensed with writing these papers and articles that document the need for national health insurance, and like we still don't have it, right? And so now I'm getting old as Methuselah, not really, versus when I first started with equity and saying, wow, right?
right.
So a second point is, and this is like to some of the people on the planet, we need to cut the intellectual
Mm,
rhetoric and focus more on how it translates into programs. Folk up with new fads and words left and
Yes.
right, and
And it's the
we
same thing.
gotta
It's the same
cut through
thing.
that crap. Third,
Right.
it's interesting. We need to have more collective brain trust activities than silo work. We have beautiful, brilliant people around the planet, and we need to kind of come together and just sit around in our onesies and wrestle with stuff. And do we get the thoughts,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um, there's there's a lack of the intergenerational transfer of knowledge, right? Um, and I'm very concerned about that. And then, there's actually a lack of connection. There's we have organizations that exist that we need to bubble up, and that are liberatory-based organizations. I'll give you several examples. The Highlander Center for Research and Education up in Tennessee, who trained folk in the civil rights movement, been around 90 years. Southern Movement Assembly that focuses on the South. The Bishop Roberts Poor People's Campaign, which really replicates what King did in the 1960s, and actually put out a report talking about what has or hasn't happened in terms of wage improvement and employment, right? Then, the other thing, one of my passions is that I really seem to have a hard time understanding why we have yet to have a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now,
Listen.
truth be known, in the United States, there's been one in Canada, right?
Oh, no.
Now,
Yes, and yes, thank you for clarifying for the audience. In the
there,
United States.
there was actually a historic Black Women's Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the UN in 2016. So there was one here, there was one in Greensboro, North Carolina, but we haven't had a national one. So there are things that we could do, that we need to do, that would push the envelope, to overcome some of these barriers.
Wow. I just want you to know, Crib community, that you learned some things this evening. Just take note. I'm taking copious notes right now, but just take note on the live. Just take note.
With that wisecrack, if you don't know, you better ask someone.
Yes. Ain't that the truth? And now you know. If you don't know, now you know.
Now you know. Right now we're read in, right? Yeah. Now you want to play back those things and go check out these spaces. There are people out here doing stuff. We just need to be connected more.
Wow. I want to talk about your article, and I think this is something that I think the Crib community would enjoy hearing about from your thoughts about what you meant when you wrote this article. Let me get into it.
Not just knee deep.
In your article titled "Unraveling the Persistent Legacy of Structural Racism Against Impoverished Communities of Color in the United States," you discuss the impact of code switching on policymaking. I'm wondering if you could, one, elaborate on what this concept entails for our audience, and then two, how does the concept of code switching, as discussed in your article, highlight the ways policies and policy making perpetuate inherently discriminatory or violent practices, particularly against Black communities? Hello.
Well, I'll give you, and by the way, I'm glad you actually talked about the piece about violence. We have to understand violence not just about assault. It's about behavioral stuff. It's about state violence. It's about being hostile. It's about showing disrespect. It covers a wide swath, right?
Please.
So first, I'm gonna give the elevator speech version of code switching and give two examples. Code switching is the idea of using a seemingly neutral term that in effect disproportionately impacts a group. So rather than use the word race in a policy, they'll focus the policy on, for example, in industries and communities where Blacks work, where they live in or their consumption habits instead, right? And I'll give you two examples. In the U.S., in the 1935 Social Security Act, which we talked about, oh yeah, it helped deal with lowering the poverty amongst the elderly. Well, they excluded farm workers and domestic workers and staff, which disproportionately represented African Americans. So when they passed the legislation, what you did is you wiped out blacks, whatever saying the word black, or in that case, Negro, in the legislation. Second example we can contribute to Bill Clinton is the disproportionate sentence disparity for crack possession versus cocaine.
Yes.
They're both scheduled narcotics, but blacks who were disproportionate consumers of crack, and they were sentenced for long times in prisons, right? Versus powder cocaine, right? So in essence, we didn't have to say black. Yet what did Richard Pryor say about prisons? It was just us, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
yes.
And the pause here is that we have to really dissect those words and languages that people use in the veneer of being polite to say, all right, let's put our finger on who's impacted by this. And that is what code switching is. And it's used effectively more than you ever want to know.
I wanted so very much to invite that into the space relevant to this conversation about transforming research into policy and practice, because it is so very much about who defines the problem, how is the problem defined, but the way in which you write about code switching in terms of how it informs policy is very different from, not very different, but I think it's a masterful analysis of the ways in which structures can be utilized to continue to oppress, to continue to marginalize. So thank you for that. Thank you so much.
And that's an example of what is called state violence, right? When a public entity, a public institution use policies to harm individuals. So you see quite a bit of discussion about, police activity and they linking that up with state violence. It's more than that. When you have programs that take the whole thing that we're having about housing and eviction. Who are the people being evicted, right? Who are the people that are in food deserts, that kind of thing. And if you see that policies and programs are designed to disproportionately affect certain groups, then that's a structural issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just think I just could go on and on, but I'm looking at the clock. But woo, I am pinging. I'm on fire with this conversation tonight. Oh my gosh. Anyway, y'all, you see, we are deliberately inviting guests who are talking about the theme, strange fruit, the violent erasure of Black bodies. But what we need you to understand is it's not always just the obvious physical assault. It is the deliberate erasure of a people through systems, through policy, through silencing that we must be aware of if we're going to create systemic change. Just leave that there. Okay. In the field of social work, next question. We are bound by ethical principles grounded in social justice, human and civil rights to respond to communities who are systematically being violently erased, again, physically, spiritually, politically, mentally, symbolically, and the list goes on and on. What are the steps we should be taking to ensure that our research is transformative, that our research informs policy and practice that is well positioned to prevent these forms of erasure?
One way to think about this is to talk about things that are models and approaches that are on the ground that we just need to take up more of. And I'll give you some examples. We've had grants and programs that focused on rites of passages for youth of color, religion, gender, sexual orientation since the 1990s. And it demonstrated that that's a resiliency-based activity. This is something that we've been doing for 30 years, right? We need to see more of that programming infused in our local communities. Talk about the example of how would I say, pulling back from public education around certain subject areas. Well, the solution focus is you put them in these rites of passage programs, right? Second thing is that we really need to press on the whole thing of doing content education and knowing your rights, knowing your voting rights. And I'll just say that for the sake of time, because there's like a whole discussion about that, right? And there's just a subtlety of your power is from everything from the school board all the way up to the presidency, right? We have to understand you gotta step into all that. Third, we need to embrace this concept of sovereign wealth. Sovereign wealth. When you think about the country of Norway, they take the proceeds from this is just based upon what we know, right? The proceeds from the North Sea oil profit, and they put it into the benefit for its citizens. What a novel concept that's occurring. Look it up. How come we don't have that social democracy discussion? I don't know, in other countries, maybe west of Norway. Just a little more. I'm just saying. And one other bomb I'll drop is while we're over here just looking at the lint on our shirt, we need to see things globally, like the expanded power of BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That's also expanding to other countries. Saudi Arabia is being asked to join that. The United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Egypt, and Ethiopia. What's the point? Is that when you look at the increase in the global domestic product outside of the US, Canada, and Europe, you find that the power players in the 21st century are in these entities we just talked about. So while we are obsessed over our greatness, they're making moves.
They making moves.
Just saying.
They making moves.
This, like I said, this is the conversation to play back 40 years from now. That's just my thought.
Drop. Mic drop. Mic drop. All right. I knew it's 9:05, so I'm going to just ask the final question, group community. Thank you for staying with us, because I do want to know the answer. It's a question we ask all of our guests. As Black researchers, we are often driven to do this work as a means of responding to the urgent, deeply rooted call to serve our communities, who continue to be over-policed in many forms. With that sense of urgent responsibility comes a level of resolute perseverance and complex traumatic assault that is persistent. How do you care for yourself, Dr. Lee, while this necessary work?
Elevator speech. 5 quick points.
All
Staying
right.
spiritually grounded, loving humanity, loving culture, embracing that 7-generation forward and back concept of First Nations, and just being present in the moment, like right now. I keep thinking about Roland Kirk's piece called Bright Moments, and he says, bright moments is being with sisterheads and brotherheads like you and me. Right now, here. Drop that microphone. Oh.
What a gift you have given me this evening, and so many who have joined us this evening. What a gift. What a gift. What a gift.
Well, they say, right? Take a picture, it lasts longer.
Oh my gosh. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Oh my gosh. Do I appreciate you? Really. You've touched my heart in a way that I think I truly needed. I truly needed. Truly needed.
Well, and the other word for everyone, because we have this kindred brother sister energy, and what happens is, you know, we're in this space and we're committed and convicted to supporting each other, even even after we're formally in somebody's job or position. And that's what life is supposed to be about.
100. It's the way I was raised. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much for joining us. And Crib community, thank you for showing up and showing out every Wednesday night to support. As always, from our crib to yours, stay safe and keep well. Good night.